Hey everyone, I'm Almar of almarsguides.com, and in this video here, I'm going to talk to you about bards in classic EQ all the way to the end of Prophecy of Ro. This is going to be an audio version of my bard class guide, which you can see on the screen right here. So I have a written version of this guide on my site, and that's going to be the main version. Whenever I realize I made a mistake or something like that, that's going to be the first one and probably the only one that I update. And this is basically just me reading off parts and narrating and giving you the same sort of information that's already in this guide. For any of you that want an audio version or you prefer a video over a text version, this is more or less for you. So, to get started, the reason I chose Prophecy of Ro as where this guide ends is because bards start to change and the game starts to change fundamentally a lot after this expansion. Everything starts to balance more out. A lot of AAs get added that kind of just shape the class into what it is in the future. And yeah, you'll basically, if you play through that era, you'll see what I mean. So in this early era, Bard's role on raids is to give ADPS to melee and casters. Eventually it becomes only melee. And as a bard, you can provide things like mana regen, haste, over haste, healing, damage shield, snare, mez. Usually you won't be snaring and mezzing on raids, but you'll be doing that in groups quite a bit. During the early eras, you also get charm, which you can use, and that's another thing that you may or may not want to do depending on your playstyle. Usually in the early eras, you'll be using two melodies, one for a caster group and one for a melee group eventually, and another for a tank group. I'll go over that a little bit later. But eventually you'll be able to consolidate that to just one. So in these early eras, bards are going to do pretty terrible damage. Your damage, I'd say, is going to start to get better around Planes of Power, and then it'll get a little bit better with each expansion that goes on until about House of Thule. And then you can kind of start doing burn rotations with the rest of them. So your best way to make a character stronger early Everquest is going to be increase their stats. Bards are going to want strength, dexterity, and a secondary stat called attack. This is if you're even attacking in the first place. If you know for a fact that you're not going to attack, then you're going to want survivability stats such as armor class, health, stamina, agility, stuff like that. If you're going to do group content, you're also going to want charisma because that will increase the duration of charm and mez if you're going to be using that. And of course, if you are going to be swinging your little sword, you're going to want some haste on your belt or on your back, whatever slot you can get it on. There's gloves that have it too in this era. And it's on a few, I think, weapons or range slots. So Planes of Power is going to be the first expansion that you're going to see heroic stats added in, and this is going to change a bit of what you're going to do and what you're going to look for on gear, I should say. So heroic stats start out very infrequently on gear, and then eventually they become more and more common until basically every single piece of gear in the game will have the heroic stats. And these heroic stats are going to give you kind of sort of a similar benefit as normal stats, just lesser is what I would say. And all of these heroic stats are also going to have soft caps too. So it's going to be better to spread them out a little bit rather than to focus all in one. So bards are going to want heroic dexterity, heroic agility, heroic strength, and heroic stamina. And in this early era, you're probably going to want heroic agility and heroic stamina the most. Those are the ones you're going to get the most benefit out of. Heroic dex and strength aren't even going to help you unless you're meleeing in the first place, and that's usually something that doesn't come until later. If you would like to learn more about heroic stats and what they do, you'll want to check out this guide on my website, the one that's on screen right now. You can get this. I linked to it in basically all of the class guides. You really don't have to dive in and learn what heroic stats do until Secrets of Fader, I'd say, around level 75. Once that starts to happen, you kind of have to learn what heroic stats do, because almost all of your benefit from then on will come from heroic stats and not normal stats. Well, you still get your benefit from normal stats, but you can't raise them anymore with gear. It'll become a lot more difficult. So, important focus effects. Bards, you're going to want instruments. Eventually, you're going to be able to get your instrument focuses on your gear. However, that doesn't start to happen until I'd say Omens of War or so. Once you get to Omens of War, you can basically get augs, which will allow you to get a bunch of different instrument foci, and that'll make your life a lot easier. You're also going to want haste, not really a focus, but it's equally as important. And then for other focuses, you're going to want cleave, ferocity. Those will be the two main melee boosts that you can get for DPS. And we're starting to move into the era where you can actually do DPS, so getting the focuses that will improve it. Improve dodge, that's survivability. Improve parry and block, that's survivability. And extended range, that's utility. So, like I said before, as a bard, your most important songs are going to be Regen, Sealos, Haste, Overhaste, Resist, Mez, Pacify, and any spells that boost stats or spell damage. In the early game, you'll get spells that give you like dexterity bonuses to group and increase the proc rate of weapons. That's something you want to use when you have melee in your group. And you'll also get some spells that will increase the spell damage of spells cast in your group. You want to use that with casters in your group. So looking here, if you look at the screen now, for those of you that are listening to it like it's a podcast, I have a few different melody examples with their spell names up on the screen right now. And I also explain amplification, which is a bard spell you'll be getting, it's something you'll basically want to use at the start of your melody macro. You'll want to use amplification, and then it'll benefit the next 10 songs that you cast. So you'll start with amplification, go through 2 rotations of your songs, and then hit amplification again. And the melody macro you see here is the one that I do that with. So if, bards are a musical, so, kind of think of it as measures, if you look at it like that. So, I have a few different examples, like I said, on screen. If you would like to read them, I guess pause it or go to my website. One thing that's worth mentioning is when pulling, you may want to use Dispel. I also have that here in the guide. This only really matters for Lucklin and pre-Lucklin. If you're in Planes of Power, you can consolidate all of these into one, which I'm going to talk about in the next section. It was just easy to give spell examples of what's useful by using actual melody rotations. Before we transition out of the spells and what's useful here, I would like to point out this Aura of the Muse. So in Prophecy of Ro, most classes get an aura, and that's going to stack with basically everything else that you have. And Bard's Aura is actually not too bad. There's classes that definitely get better auras, but you get an okay one, and since it stacks with everything else, you'll want to use it and, keep it with you. So looking at your disciplines, you don't get very many in this era, if we're being honest. You get the same 2 that everybody gets, the Resist and Fearless. And then you also get Death Dance, Pure Tone, and Thousand Blades. So Thousand Blades is going to be your biggest DPS disc that you can get for a while, and that comes out in Depths of Dark Hollow. The other 2 that you get in Velius, so Death Dance is going to be your best DPS disc until you get Thousand Blades. And Pure Tone is basically a disc that you'll want to pop to increase your DPS and help out the group. It's not something that, it's something that can benefit you on its own if you're using a AoE spell that's dealing damage, but aside from that, not too much. So we're going to move into AAs, and for that I'm going to actually tab into the game because the game gives you a lot more details than my website does. My website just lists all of the ones that you can activate, which is what I'm going to show you here. So in Lucklin, the very first one that you get is this Reaching Notes. This will extend the radius of your beneficial area of effect songs, and as you can see, there's quite a few ranks to it. You want to get this every time you can upgrade it because that will increase the distance your songs go, and that could benefit the entire raid if you get them, far enough. So in Planes of Power, you get Boastful Bellow, which is something that you're going to add to your DPS rotation. It's a very minor amount of DPS, and when you get it in Planes of Power, it's not that big of a deal, but eventually it's going to go into your DPS rotation. You're going to use it basically every fight. And, Sonic Disturbance you get. I personally almost never use this, and I don't really like it. It's every class kind of gets one of these knockbacks, and I don't really find them to be that useful. Although I'm sure somebody out there actually uses them and likes it. So fading memories, this is the very first fade that I think anybody gets. I'm not sure when Monk gets their feigned death. But fading memories is something that allows you to escape combat entirely and basically avoid all enemies that are following you, and you just basically poof away and drop aggro of everything and escape. That's more or less what it does. It gives you invisibility so you can continue to get away too, if you have anything following you or if you're still running through a bunch of mobs. And then let's see. Omens of War. So Omens of War adds Dance of Blades. It also adds Shield of Notes. So Dance of Blades is something you're going to be using when you're basically popping your cooldowns. You can see it increases your dual wield and double attack, and yeah, it's a disc you pop when you're actually trying to do damage, which in Omens of War, your damage, I guess, is starting to get better. So Shield of Notes, this will absorb incoming damage, direct spell, or melee damage. It's okay. Usually you'll hit it when you're getting hit. And I don't believe they get anything in DON or Prophecy of Ro. Yeah, I believe that is all that they get in this era. Oh, I see. DODH does add 2. It adds Cacophony and Song of Stone, which Cacophony is a stronger version of Boastful Bellow with a longer cooldown. It's an spell, and Song of Stone is also if you ask me. That's a Swarm Pet AA, and you'll use both on bosses and names, but they don't increase your DPS by all that much. So moving into one of the final sections, how to play, basics for Bard. So we talked about that a little bit earlier. So here you can see a macro for an amplification macro, and it has what the rotation would be and how it would work. So it does 2 rotations of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it starts with amplification. And this is what the rotation would be. If you're in Planes of Power, of course, otherwise you'd have to scroll up and use what it would be in Lachlan. And then we also have an example here of a Cielo's melody, a long one. So this would use Cielo's Song of Travel at the very start, which is a 2-minute long spell, and it would basically repeat your melody over and over and over and over and over, and then eventually it would loop back around and use Cielo's again. So honestly, it's not too difficult to set up bards if you're going to be boxing them. If you're going to be actually playing them, it's a little bit of a different story. And you may want to dive into this a little bit more. I will also have guides linked at the bottom here that I find to be helpful. There's one on the Daybreak forums that I found helpful. Also, there's somebody else on YouTube, Ion Blaze, that has videos on how to play bards that is also quite helpful. And I would highly encourage you to read over and listen to those videos, read over that guide too, and then also use this one. Basically get as much information as you can out of as many different sources as you can, and take the best with each one is what I would recommend. So as far as doing damage on a bard, the last little section that I have here, you're going to do damage with auto attack and Boastful Bellow, and you're also going to want to auto skill kick in this era. Aside from that, when you actually get your burns, you're going to want to use Thousand Blades Discipline, Dance of Blades, Cacophony, and Song of Stone all at the same time. Usually at the start of a boss fight is when you'll use all of them together. And that's really all there is to it. Bards are pretty easy to play in this era. You're basically just a song bot, as they call it. And yeah, hopefully this video helped you guys out. If it did, be sure to leave me a like because that helps me out. And I do strongly encourage you to check out the resources that I have here You can also find the Ion Blaze videos by just searching them on YouTube. He goes into detail, shows different tooltips on screen, and does an overall good job. But anyway, thanks for watching. See ya.